The lecture hall buzzed with quiet energy as alien students filed in, settling into their seats. At the front of the room, Dr. Vrinther adjusted the holographic display, her mandibles clicking in practiced precision. "Welcome to Intergalactic First Aid 101, she began, her voice carrying the calm authority of a seasoned teacher. Sam Harris, the only human in the room, slouched in his seat with an easy grin. He spun a pen between his fingers, already looking like he had a few things to say about the topic. "The principles of universal first aid are simple," Dr. Vrinther continued. "Remain calm, avoid further harm, and always follow protocol." Sam muttered something under his breath, just loud enough to catch the attention of his neighbor, Grolvik, a gelatinous blob who quivered curiously. "What's wrong with protocol?" Grolvik gurgled. "Nothing," Sam said with a shrug, "unless you're on the clock and bleeding out." Dr. Vrinther's antennae twitched. "Mr. Harris," she said sharply, "do you have something to add?" Sam leaned forward, still grinning. "Just that humans aren't big on waiting for medbots to show up. Sometimes you've got to work with what's in front of you." The room went quiet, alien eyes, or their equivalents, turning to him. "Care to elaborate?" Dr. Vrinther asked, her tone skeptical. "Sure," Sam said, sitting up. "Let's say someone's got a broken arm. You grab a stick, wrap it up with a belt or shoelace, and call it a day." The class erupted in murmurs. "A stick?" Grolvik asked, wobbling nervously. "Yeah, keeps the limb stable," Sam replied. "What, you just let it flop around?" The murmurs turned into gasps. "Surely you don't mean manually stabilizing it?" Dr. Vrinther's voice had a new edge of alarm. "Of course," Sam said with a grin. "And if the bone's out of place, you pop it back in. Hurts like hell, but it's better than leaving it." Someone let out a horrified squawk, and Grolvik turned a faint shade of green. "You reset bones?" Sam shrugged. "Why not? And if someone's bleeding, you grab a shirt, press down, and stop the bleeding. It's not rocket science." "With your hands," Grolvik sputtered. "How else?" The room fell silent, the alien students frozen in collective disbelief. Even Dr. Vrinther seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Human first aid is certainly unique." "Unique's one word for it," Sam said with a wink. "Lesson 1. You do whatever it takes." The lecture resumed, but the air in the room felt different. The alien students kept glancing at Sam, their expressions oscillating between awe and discomfort. Dr. Vrinther, to her credit, managed to continue her presentation without further interruptions. "Now," she said, gesturing to a diagram of an alien with a glowing wound on its side, "in the case of blood loss, one should immediately use a sterile gel pad to seal the injury and prevent further harm. These pads are standard issue on all galactic medical kits." Sam raised his hand. "And if you don't have a gel pad?" Dr. Vrinther froze for a moment. "The assumption is that one would have proper equipment." "But what if you don't?" Sam pressed. "Well," she began, visibly flustered, "in such a scenario, one might—" "Apply direct pressure with your hands," Sam interjected. A ripple of horrified gasps swept through the class. Dr. Vrinther clicked her mandibles sharply. "That is not an advisable method, Mr. Harris." "Works for us," Sam said, leaning back with a grin. "Humans are big on adapting to bad situations. You don't always have fancy tools on a battlefield or wherever you find yourself." The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the implications sank in. An avian student finally broke the silence. "Your species' methods sound painful." "Effective," Sam corrected. After what felt like an eternity of tension, Dr. Vrinther clasped her hands together. "Let us move to the practical portion of today's lesson. A simulated emergency drill will allow you to practice these concepts in a controlled environment." Holographic mannequins began appearing around the room, each one displaying a different injury. A reptilian alien with a simulated broken leg, a jelly-like figure with a leaking, glowing wound, a bird-like creature clutching its side. The students split into groups, cautiously approaching their assigned holograms. Sam was paired with Grolvik, who quivered nervously beside him. "Our hologram is leaking," Grolvik said, pointing a gooey appendage toward the glowing wound on their mannequin. "Bleeding," Sam corrected. "Step 1. Stop the bleeding." Grolvik pulled out the medical kit provided and fumbled with a sterile gel pad, which slipped from their grasp and fell to the floor. They let out a panicked gurgle. "What do we do? It's contaminated now." Sam rolled his eyes. "We improvise." He grabbed his own shirt, ripped off a sleeve, and pressed it against the wound. "Like this." Grolvik wobbled violently. "You're touching it. That's—" "Keeping it alive," Sam finished, pressing firmly. "Don't worry about fancy tools. The goal is simple. Stop the leak." Dr. Vrinther swept through the room, observing each group. When she reached Sam and Grolvik, her wings twitched visibly. "Mr. Harris, this is not the recommended procedure." "Maybe not," Sam said, "but it works. And it's fast." Before she could respond, an alarm blared. The room froze as the holograms vanished, replaced by a new one, a simulation gone wrong. A hologram of an alien student stumbled into the center of the room, clutching its leg and emitting simulated cries of pain. Its injury, an exaggerated compound fracture, was disturbingly realistic. Dr. Vrinther moved toward the control panel, but the system wasn't responding. This was not part of the program. The students froze, their panic growing as the hologram's cries grew louder. "Someone do something!" Grolvik gurgled. Sam stepped forward, crouching beside the hologram. "All right, let's fix you up." "Mr. Harris, I strongly advise—" "Doctor," Vrinther began, but Sam was already in motion. "Relax, Professor. I've got this." He grabbed a metal ruler from the supply table and snapped it in half. With quick, confident movements, he placed the pieces on either side of the hologram's leg and tied them together with his belt. "Splint secured," Sam muttered, glancing at the wound. "Looks messy, needs sealing." He reached for a pen, popped the end off, and activated a small portable laser, using it to simulate cauterizing the hologram's wound. A faint hissing noise followed. The alien students looked on, wide-eyed and horrified. He's burning it," someone whispered. "Nope, sealing it," Sam replied without looking up. "Keeps it from bleeding out. This guy's good to go." The simulation stabilized. The hologram's cries ceased, and the lights dimmed to indicate the emergency was resolved. Dr. Vrinther approached, her expression a mix of shock and grudging respect. "Mr. Harris, while I cannot condone your methods, I must admit, they were effective." Sam stood, brushing his hands off. "That's the point, Professor. Sometimes you don't have time to do it the pretty way." The alien students whispered among themselves, their initial horror giving way to a kind of reluctant awe. Grolvik finally spoke. I think I understand why humans are called Deathworlders." Sam grinned, patting Grolvik on the shoulder. "Welcome to the club, buddy." The room had not yet recovered from Sam's impromptu demonstration. The alien students remained rooted in place, their expressions flickering between awe and a kind of horrified fascination. Dr. Vrinther cleared her throat, attempting to regain control of the class. "Well," she began, her mandibles clicking nervously, "while Mr. Harris's methods were unconventional, they do highlight an important point about adaptability in emergencies." "That's one way to put it," muttered a bird-like alien, still staring at the now stabilized hologram. Sam smirked, crossing his arms as he leaned against the supply table. "Adaptability is what we do best. You won't always have the perfect tools or the ideal situation. On Earth, survival is about making what you have work." The avian student fluffed their feathers, glancing nervously at the human. "Does that mean humans just improvise all the time?" "Pretty much," Sam replied with a shrug. "If duct tape and stubbornness can't fix it, you're probably in real trouble." This earned him blank stares from the class. "What's duct tape?" Grolvik asked cautiously. Sam blinked, genuinely surprised. "You don't know about duct tape? Oh, you poor sheltered souls." He pulled a small grey roll from his cargo pocket and held it up like it was a sacred artifact. "This stuff can fix just about anything. Broken tools, leaky pipes, even a busted spacesuit if you're quick about it." Grolvik recoiled slightly, their gelatinous form wobbling. "You're saying you'd use that on a medical emergency?" "Sure would," Sam said, grinning. "You've got a cut? Wrap it. Need to hold something together? Tape it down. Duct tape saves lives." Dr. Vrinther's wings twitched violently, a sign of barely contained exasperation. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm, Mr. Harris, I must remind the class that proper medical procedures should always take precedence." "Of course, Professor," Sam said, his grin widening. "Unless you're in a pinch." As the lecture continued, the students were paired off for hands-on practice with the holographic mannequins. Sam's earlier demonstration had left a mark, and the alien students approached their assignments with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. One brave reptilian student, Tashvar, approached Sam cautiously. They were taller than him, with shimmering emerald scales and a row of sharp teeth that glinted under the lights. I want to try your method," Tashvar said, their voice low but determined. Sam raised an eyebrow. "You sure? It's not exactly textbook." "That's why I want to learn it," Tashvar replied. "In the field, if the medpod fails or supplies run out, I want to be ready." Sam's grin softened into something more approving. "All right, let's start with a simple splint." The class watched as Sam guided Tashvar through the process, using a pair of ruler-like tools and a strip of cloth from the supply kit. Sam explained each step with an easy confidence, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. "See? Doesn't have to be pretty, just effective," he said, as they finished securing the injured limb. Tashvar nodded, their slitted eyes narrowing with concentration. "It feels different from what we were taught, but it makes sense." "You're getting it," Sam said, clapping them on the shoulder. "Now let's move on to stopping a bleed." The other students gradually began to approach, their fear giving way to cautious interest. "Can you show us how to—" one insectoid student began, pointing at a holographic wound. "How about—" another started, their gelatinous form quivering with excitement. Dr. Vrinther looked on, her wings fluttering nervously, as Sam's unorthodox methods became the focus of the room. She stepped forward, her voice sharp, but not unkind. "Mr. Harris, while your techniques are certainly unique, I must insist that they remain supplemental to standard procedure." "Of course, Professor," Sam replied with a smirk. "But if anyone here needs a crash course in survival, you know where to find me." The students chuckled nervously, but the tension in the room had eased. As the session wound down, Sam found himself surrounded by alien students, asking rapid-fire questions about human first aid. "Is it true humans can survive with broken ribs? What's the strangest thing you've used to fix an injury? Do humans really stitch themselves back together?" Sam answered each question with a mix of humor and practicality, his explanations earning equal parts admiration and disbelief. Dr. Vrinther finally called for order, her voice carrying over the chatter. "That's enough for today. I trust you've all gained a broader perspective on the diversity of medical practices." Sam stretched, gathering his things as the students began filing out. Grolvik lingered by his side, their gelatinous body quivering faintly. "You humans are terrifying," Grolvik said finally. Sam grinned. "You're not wrong. But hey, at least we're resourceful." The next day, the classroom buzzed with energy as students filed in for another session of Intergalactic First Aid 101. After Sam's improvised demonstration, whispers about Deathworlder tactics had spread across the academy. A few students even arrived early, eager to see what unconventional wisdom the human would share next. Dr. Vrinther stood at the front, her mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested mild irritation. "Today, we will focus on applying textbook first aid methods during a simulated emergency scenario," she announced, casting a sharp glance at Sam as if daring him to interrupt. Sam smiled innocently, but remained silent. The holographic mannequins reappeared around the room, each one displaying various injuries. The students paired off again, this time with a noticeable eagerness to prove they could handle the tasks ahead. "This time," Dr. Vrinther said, her tone crisp, "you will strictly adhere to the protocols we have reviewed. Creativity, while admirable, is not the goal of today's exercise." "Got it, Professor," Sam said, giving her a mock salute. She sighed but continued. The drill began smoothly enough. Students diligently applied gel pads, wrapped holographic wounds, and followed the professor's instructions with precision. Sam and Grolvik worked on their assigned mannequin, the blob alien wobbling nervously, but trying their best to replicate what they'd learned. "That's it," Sam said encouragingly, as Grolvik adjusted a bandage. "Keep the pressure steady, and you'll do fine." Grolvik quivered in what might have been pride. "It's less terrifying than I thought." Just as the students were starting to gain confidence, a sharp alarm blared through the room. The holograms flickered for a moment before resetting, not to their original calm training poses, but to new, hyper-realistic injuries. One hologram clutched its side, emitting simulated cries of pain. Another lay limp on the floor, a glowing wound on its head. Dr. Vrinther's wings flared in alarm. This was not part of the program." The students froze, staring at the holograms as panic began to set in. "What do we do?" someone cried. Sam stepped forward, already moving toward the nearest injured hologram. "We fix it. That's what we do." While the rest of the class hesitated, Sam knelt beside a holographic figure with a glowing fracture in its leg. "All right," he muttered, assessing the situation. "Compound fracture. Needs stabilizing." He grabbed two ruler-like tools from the supply table and snapped them to the right length. With quick, confident motions, he tied them to the hologram's leg, using strips of cloth. "You're breaking protocol," a student exclaimed. Sam didn't look up. "Yeah, and saving their leg while I'm at it." Dr. Vrinther approached, her tone sharp. "Mr. Harris, this is highly unorthodox." "So's the situation, Professor," Sam shot back. "Your protocol's great when everything's perfect. Out here, you improvise." Grolvik quivered beside him, their voice shaky. What should I do?" Sam tossed a roll of duct tape toward them. "Help me secure this splint." Grolvik fumbled but obeyed, wrapping the tape around the makeshift supports. Watching Sam work seemed to galvanize the other students. One by one, they began stepping forward, cautiously applying what they'd seen. An insectoid student used a pair of tongs to simulate stabilizing a holographic neck injury. A reptilian student mimicked Sam's earlier direct pressure technique, albeit with a shaking hand. Dr. Vrinther watched with a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration as her class transformed into a makeshift triage team. "You're doing great," Sam called out, directing students to tasks like a seasoned field medic. "But the manual says," an avian student began, only for Sam to cut them off. "Forget the manual. Focus on keeping them alive." The avian hesitated, then nodded, their feathers puffing up in determination as they pressed a gauze pad against a holographic wound. After several tense minutes, the holographic alarms ceased and the simulated injuries stabilized. The room fell silent, save for the students' heavy breathing. Dr. Vrinther stepped forward, her wings fluttering as she surveyed the scene. "I must admit," she said carefully, "this class has exceeded my expectations." Sam grinned, standing and dusting off his hands. "You're welcome, Professor." She fixed him with a sharp look, but didn't argue. Instead, she turned to the class. "While I cannot condone all of today's methods, there is value in understanding the resourcefulness demonstrated here. Well done, all of you." The students exchanged glances, their earlier fear replaced by a sense of pride. As the students filed out of the room, Grolvik lingered by Sam's side. "I still think your methods are terrifying," they said. "Thanks," Sam replied with a smirk. "No, I respect them," Grolvik added. "Humans are strange, but I see why your species survives." Sam chuckled, clapping the blob on what might have been a shoulder. "Survival's what we do best. Stick with me, and you'll pick it up in no time." As they walked out together, the classroom buzzed with the sound of alien students swapping stories of their newfound skills and nervously vowing never to underestimate a Deathworlder again. The story of the emergency drill spread like wildfire through the academy. By the next morning, Sam Harris had earned a new nickname among his alien classmates, the Patch-Up Master. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a veiled insult, but he decided to roll with it. The academy's dining hall buzzed with energy as students crowded around Sam's table. Grolvik sat beside him, their gelatinous form jiggling nervously as alien after alien bombarded Sam with questions. "Is it true you used a belt as a medical tool?" a reptilian student hissed, their sharp teeth glinting in the light. "I heard you burned someone's leg back together," an avian added, their feathers ruffling in excitement. Sam grinned, taking a sip of his coffee. First of all, it was a hologram, not a person. Second, yeah, I did. Worked like a charm. The reactions were as dramatic as expected. One alien fainted into their bowl of nutrient paste, while another's antennae shot straight up in alarm. "Humans," muttered a tall, metallic-skinned student, shaking their head. "Your species is relentless." "Relentless keeps you alive," Sam said, leaning back in his chair. "Earth's not exactly a gentle place. You pick up a few tricks when everything's trying to kill you." At the same time, Dr. Vrinther was in her office, reviewing the footage from the previous day's chaotic drill. Her wings twitched nervously as she paused the recording, replaying the moment Sam calmly secured the holographic fracture with a ruler and duct tape. She sighed, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Unconventional doesn't even begin to describe it. Her assistant, a small fur-covered creature named Yik, shuffled nervously beside her. "But it worked, didn't it? The students adapted. They even learned something." Dr. Vrinther didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned to face Yik. "Contact the Academy Board. I want to propose a new addition to the curriculum." Yik tilted his head. "A new addition?" Dr. Vrinther nodded, her wings folding neatly behind her. "Deathworlder field techniques. If nothing else, it will prepare our students for the unexpected." When the next session of Intergalactic First Aid 101 began, the atmosphere was electric. Dr. Vrinther entered the room with her usual poise, but the slight twitch of her antennae betrayed her apprehension. "Today," she began, addressing the class, "we will explore emergency improvisation methods. While traditional practices are always preferred, there are situations where adaptability can mean the difference between life and death." Sam blinked, genuinely surprised. "Wait, did you just say improvisation?" Dr. Vrinther's mandibles clicked sharply. "Yes, Mr. Harris. Your unique methods have inspired a supplemental section of the course. Consider yourself an unofficial consultant." The class erupted into murmurs, with some students eagerly pulling out their datapads to take notes. Sam grinned, leaning back in his seat. "Well, this should be fun." Dr. Vrinther activated the holographic display, showing a simulated crash site filled with injured figures. "In this scenario, standard equipment has failed. You will work in teams to stabilize the injured, using only the materials provided. The materials included random scraps of metal, fabric, and everyday objects." Sam couldn't help but laugh. "This is my kind of challenge." The students divided into groups, each tasked with addressing different injuries. Sam moved between teams, offering advice and a few sarcastic comments whenever someone hesitated. "Broken wing, use that chair leg for a splint. Leaking fluid? Wrap it tight with that scarf. No, don't panic. Just think. What would I do? Terrify us into action?" Grolvik muttered, earning a laugh from the nearby students. By the end of the exercise, every team had managed to stabilize their patients. The results weren't pretty, but they were effective. Dr. Vrinther surveyed the room, her expression unreadable. "Well done," she said at last. "It seems there is merit to these methods after all." The alien students left the classroom that day with a newfound respect for human ingenuity. Grolvik, wobbling along beside Sam, glanced up at him nervously. I thought humans were reckless, they said quietly. We are, Sam replied, grinning. But it's not just recklessness. It's like controlled chaos, Grolvik continued, as if trying to make sense of a paradox. Exactly, Sam said, and when things go wrong, chaos is your best friend. Grolvik fell silent, clearly deep in thought. Finally, they nodded. Maybe humans aren't so terrifying after all. Or maybe you're terrifying in a good way. Sam laughed, clapping the blob on what might have been a shoulder. I'll take that as a compliment. The chaos of the past few days had finally begun to settle. Word of the improvised techniques from Intergalactic First Aid 101 spread far beyond the classroom, reaching the ears of other departments, professors, and even the Academy's administration. Sam's reputation as the patch-up master had cemented itself as a permanent part of the Academy's folklore. The next session of Intergalactic First Aid 101 opened with a surprise announcement from Dr. Vrinther. Her wings fluttered briefly before she addressed the class. As many of you are aware, she began, her tone steady but slightly begrudging, our recent drills have highlighted the importance of versatility in emergency response. To that end, the Academy has decided to integrate what we are now calling Deathworlder adaptability techniques into the standard curriculum. The room exploded into murmurs. Sam leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. You're welcome, he muttered, just loud enough for Grolvik to hear. Dr. Vrinther's antennae twitched, her compound eyes narrowing slightly in Sam's direction. I would also like to remind everyone that these techniques are to be used as a last resort. Improvisation is no substitute for proper equipment and training. Sure, Sam said with a grin, but when all else fails, you'll thank me for the duct tape. The Academy decided to showcase the new curriculum at the upcoming Galactic First Aid Symposium, a prestigious event where experts shared medical advancements. Dr. Vrinther, ever the professional, reluctantly agreed to let Sam demonstrate Deathworlder techniques alongside the traditional methods. On the day of the symposium, the lecture hall was packed with spectators from across the galaxy. Delegates from hundreds of species filled the room, eager to see the infamous human improvisations in action. Sam stood at the front with Dr. Vrinther, who was clearly trying to maintain her composure. Remember, Mr. Harris, she whispered, you are here to demonstrate practicality, not chaos. Chaos is practical, Sam replied with a wink. The demonstration began with a traditional approach to first aid. Dr. Vrinther meticulously explained each step as alien volunteers carefully applied sterile gel pads, calibrated med scanners, and other advanced tools to holographic patients. Then it was Sam's turn. All right, he said, stepping forward and clapping his hands together. Let's say all your fancy equipment's busted, you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, and your buddy's bleeding out. What do? The audience murmured nervously. You do this, Sam continued. He grabbed a torn piece of cloth and a metal rod from the demonstration table. Within seconds, he had rigged a makeshift tourniquet on the holographic patient. Stops the bleeding, buys you time. Easy. He moved on to another hologram with a broken limb, using splints made from a chair leg and duct tape to stabilize it. Doesn't look pretty, but it works. The murmurs turned into gasps of shock, disbelief, and, slowly, admiration. By the end of the demonstration, the room was buzzing with energy. Delegates lined up to ask questions, some even taking notes as Sam casually explained his methods. Is it true humans can survive without medical pods for days? Do you really set your own bones? What else can duct tape do? Dr. Vrinther watched the scene unfold with a mix of pride and mild exasperation. She finally stepped forward, raising her hands to quiet the room. While Mr. Harris's techniques are undeniably effective in extreme circumstances, she said carefully, I must stress that they are not meant to replace proper medical procedures. Of course not, Sam chimed in, flashing a grin. But when you're out of options, a little chaos can go a long way. The symposium ended with a surprising announcement. Several institutions requested permission to adopt the Deathworlder techniques into their training programs. Dr. Vrinther reluctantly agreed, her professionalism outweighing her reservations. Back at the academy, Sam found himself surrounded by his classmates, all eager to learn more. Even Grolvik, who had once been terrified of human methods, had become one of his most enthusiastic supporters. "I never thought I'd say this," the gelatinous blob admitted, "but I actually feel prepared for an emergency now." Sam grinned, clapping them on the back. "Told you, stick with me, and you'll be saving lives in no time." As the class wrapped up their final session of the term, Dr. Vrinther addressed her students one last time. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience, "first aid is about more than just following procedures. It's about adaptability, resilience, and the will to act when others cannot." Her gaze briefly landed on Sam, who gave her a small nod. Outside the classroom, Grolvik caught up to Sam. "So, what's next for you?" "Not sure," Sam said with a grin. "But wherever I go, I'll make sure to bring a roll of duct tape. You never know when it'll come in handy." Grolvik wobbled in agreement. Terrifying, but effective, just like humans. Sam laughed, throwing an arm around his gelatinous friend as they walked off. "Now you're getting it." And with that, the legend of humanity's improvised first aid tactics began to spread across the galaxy, ensuring that no species would ever underestimate a Deathworlder's ingenuity again.